The next topic that we'll begin to discuss in Psychology 300 is the topic of research. How do we establish what is true and reliable and valid, things that we can look to change our behaviors and assume that we're going to get the right results for humans. Questions could be anything from what might make people less depressed, what might help students in a school learn, or even things that, parents might ask themselves like, does playing violent video games make children more violent? So research. We're talking about how people know things about other people's behavior. And psychology is that scientific study of human behavior. And what we call the investigation side of that are finding out what factors and variables apply to what concepts and how they change people's behaviors or feelings. That's what we call research. Now research, a lot of people think it's pretty boring, but in fact it's really fun. If any of you like those investigation shows, you like to watch the whodunits, the mysteries, this is really all about that. In fact, really good researchers find a joy in doing research because they really want to discover some new things and share that with people. So some elements of research involve obviously thinking first about a topic that you're interested in. My research was first on patients who are having surgery for epilepsy. Then I worked with some patients who had Alzheimer's. And all the time, what I'm trying to do in my discipline is to find what are the factors that specifically influence outcomes for those patients that I was dealing with. Later, I began to work with children, and my dissertation work was on children who had traumatic brain injuries. The research that I did was really all aimed at trying to help patients who had outcomes that were deleterious to their overall cognitive skills. That was that they had some problem initially after surgery or after head injury, after cancer. And I was trying to find out what were the factors that would help them recover, help them get compensatory mechanisms so that they could become made more whole than they currently were and to grow in their competencies. When I first started doing research, it was a little bit intimidating because they put me in a research group, so people who were older than me and knew more than I was, and they were doing research. But eventually, what I found is all you have to do is read more than anybody else about a subject and you'll become a researcher. You'll become somebody who's investigating yourself. So reading is a key element of this. And if you don't know about Google Scholar, if you don't know about our libraries, resources online, there's plenty of investigation tools. If you're interested, don't just put it in a Google box and search that particular subject. Of course, that's one way of doing it, but I would suggest if you're interested in doing scholarly research, go to Google Scholar. Google Scholar is a separate entity that looks specifically for peer-reviewed journal articles. Now, what does that mean? Peer-reviewed journals are, if I went and investigated eating unripe lemons is going to make you happier, and I published something on that on my own, and nobody actually reviewed the data or reviewed my methodology, reviewed my findings, and I just got to publish it and put it out there, then people are going to believe anything you say. This has been a major problem right now with the amount of information that's out on the internet because you don't know how to validate that. You don't know how to make sense of whether or not what people are telling you is true. My perspective is you should always take stuff with a grain of salt. You might be learning the brand new thing that no one has learned before, but you might be learning something that's not true, not reliable. And if you put that out there, that misinformation can lead people towards bad outcomes that they don't want. I don't think eating lemons is going to make you happier, but it might. I haven't investigated that yet. So again, I'm not only skeptical on what people say, I'm skeptical about me not knowing about that. That comes with a healthy grain of humbleness, a healthy grain of salt and some humbleness, because you don't know everything. I don't know everything. Research doesn't know everything. Science doesn't know everything. There's still stuff out there to be discovered, and you can be one of those people who discovers things. It's pretty exciting for me when I discovered something that nobody else had figured out before. It doesn't really make that big of a difference, but it turns out I discovered that there is a significant difference for what month you're born in and whether or not you develop Alzheimer's disease. Now, I'll save it for another time to tell you what months those are, but let me assure you, you don't need to worry and go consult when you were born and whether or not you're going to get Alzheimer's when you're 85 years old. We will all get it if we are old enough, regardless of the month that we live in. So we should look for helpful hints about how to help people that have Alzheimer's, not look for factors that predict very little of the difference between who gets Alzheimer's and who doesn't and when. Research can be fun. It can also be pretty intense. When I was working with patients who were having brain surgeries, it was really intense. One of the cool studies I got to be a part of was with Dr. Walker and Dr. Berger at UCSF, and they were investigating where in the brain do people who speak multiple languages, polyglots, people that are multilingual, where do they store the ability to produce speech, and is that different from people who are monolinguistic, people that only speak one language? That's a really interesting factor, but again, in the operating theater where Dr. Berger is operating on someone's brain and Dr. Walker and I are testing this patient, it was pretty intense. So it can be fun, it can be intense, it can also be laid back and pretty chill. Some of the research that I did involved basically just investigating giant data sets, and I could do it at my own pace and it wasn't really stressful. So whatever aspect that you are interested in research, there's something there for you. Doing a literature review is something that a lot of people start when they start their research careers. Is they take a topic, let's say memory, and you want to do a literature search. And so what you do with a literature search is you go and you investigate on those different websites where are scholarly articles that talk about memory. And you go and you type it in and you search it up, and it comes up with a document that says this person studied eidetic memory, or this paper's about semantic memory, this paper's about flashbulb memory, this one's about eyewitness testimony in trials and how reliable is memory. Whatever one of those strikes your fancy, read it. Get the PDF. If it's on Google Scholar, you might have to pay for it, so go to our library's website first. The One Search is what you could rely on to get to the stuff that our library pays for, the journal articles that you have access to as a student of our college. So look for those and try and find something that interests you. Find an article, and then I want you to read through it. Now, when you read through it, you're not going to understand much of it. When I started reading research articles, peer-reviewed journals, I didn't know any of the methodology that they were using. The statistics were barely recognizable to me, and I was a graduate student. It's going to take time, but be patient with yourself, because once you begin to read things over and over again, you'll see the way that people use things multiple times. You'll see the questions they're asking and the outcomes they get and the data, and you'll begin to get a sense of it. So be comfortable being unfamiliar. I know that sounds really strange, but it is really the best way to begin understanding research. Also, be careful what you say when you read an article. Don't just go out and say, oh, I read an article on eyewitness testimony. Turns out you can't believe any eyewitnesses, because Elizabeth Loftus said that. You're purporting misinformation or skewing the data. Yes, there's really great questions about the accuracy and validity of eyewitness testimony, specifically around investigations where somebody viewed something to themselves or to somebody else that was very traumatic. Obviously, there are some caveats there, but you don't want to go and spout, you know everything about it because you read an article. Take it in, be humble, and recognize that we are all learning. I'm learning every day. I have so much to learn. I feel like the more I read, the more I realize I don't know. So that, again, is something that I don't want you to feel uncomfortable doing. Feel comfortable not knowing and just starting, because it's really a great process. So that's about reading journal articles. If you have any particular interests in psychology, any particular part of this course that really sparks a joy in you, or something that you really wanted to pursue, that's when you go and research those articles. Two topics in research that I want to cover right now are reliability and validity. So reliability and validity are really important topics, because if you do research and let's say I give people a survey and that survey says, are you happy? Is that a real investigation into people's happiness? If they just say, yes, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm this happy, is that sufficient for you to believe that that person's happy and that I've measured their happiness? Or are there other ways that I might go about finding a valid construct, like, say, happiness? These general terms are really difficult in psychology. You really don't want to say, I'm going to study happiness, because that's such a nebulous thing that what is your happiness and what is my happiness might be very different things. For example, right now when we're socially distanced and I'm out here by myself and doing nothing, I feel great. I love it. But a lot of other people don't like that. They feel isolated and alone, and they're not happy in those social settings. So again, my happiness and their happiness might be different things. So that's validity. Do you have a construct, anxiety or depression, and have you measured that construct well? Would everybody agree that what you're measuring is that particular construct? Is it valid? Now, reliability is another topic in research that's an important one, because let's say I do a research on, it's hot out today. It's June. It's 100 degrees out when I'm out filming this. And some researchers have said that with increased temperatures come increased crime. So, okay, I want to investigate that research and find out if that's true or not. If there's just one article that's been published showing that with increased temperatures we have increased crime, that's not necessarily reliable enough for me. In psychology, we found ourselves not doing sufficient jobs of seeing if our findings were reliable, and that is, people would do these really extensive research and they'd publish this data and everybody would be so enthralled with it and they'd say, wow, I can't believe we found out this new thing. But it turns out that their research, their findings weren't reproducible. So if you don't have a reproducible finding, then really what you've just found is an anomaly, right? What if I measured the temperature today and there was 100 crimes in California today and the temperature is 100? Then you might think to yourself, oh, well, obviously it goes up, a lot with this temperature. But if I don't measure more, if I don't measure when it's, say, 60 degrees out and see that there's less crime, maybe there's even more crime when it's colder, who knows? Maybe people need to steal things to stay warm. We don't know that. And so when you don't have something that's necessarily a reliable finding, you've got to make sure to be careful about how you state its ubiquity across cultures, across people groups, across places. It's 100 degrees here today, but I bet in San Diego it's not 100 degrees. So do you think that necessarily the day or the heat is affecting this? We need to see reliability of things. We need to do reproducible results in our research for us to be able to rely on that, to know that in the future, if we looked at the same factor, that we would get the same results. So there's been a lot of work in psychology that's reproducing research that was previously done that we don't know whether or not the reliability of that research is there. We can't definitively state whether or not there's reliable research, but there's a big push right now by researchers to go back and to review some of the sort of foundational things that we found out in our discipline, because the reliability or the reproducible research was not done. We haven't seen, are those findings something that we'll see again in the future, or were they just a one-off, an anomaly, a statistical oddity that we've made a bunch of assumptions about?